In 2015, Sarah Mitchell heard a door slam in an empty house. Not creak, not drift. Slam, with the force of someone leaving in anger. She was the only person in the building. Every door was locked. Every window closed. The house had been vacant for 3 months. But something upstairs wanted her to know it was there. Her grandmother left her this Pennsylvania farmhouse, and a warning no one understood. For 60 years, Eleanor Graves refused to sleep on the second floor. 3 rooms stayed locked. Family photos stopped at the staircase. When relatives asked why, she'd say, "There's nothing up there you need to see." But Eleanor died without explaining, and Sarah started finding things. A name scratched into the attic floor. A woman's journal from 1919. Pages filled with desperate scrawl. "He is going to kill me tonight." Hospital records that ended abruptly. A recording hidden in the walls. A dying woman's final testimony. And carved into the bedroom floor where she died, Thomas lied. The truth wasn't paranormal. It was worse. It was deliberate. And it had been buried in plain sight for 96 years. If you want to know what really happened in that house, hit the like button and stay until the end. This one doesn't let go. Sarah Mitchell had never been afraid of silence. As a journalist in her mid-20s, she'd spent years in quiet libraries, empty courtrooms, and late-night archives. Silence was where the truth lived. But the silence inside her grandmother's house felt different. It pressed against her eardrums. It waited. Her grandmother, Eleanor Graves, had died in March of 2015 at the age of 91. The funeral was small. Eleanor had outlived most of her friends and all of her siblings. She left behind a 2-story farmhouse 20 miles outside Pittsburgh, built in 1898, nestled between dense Pennsylvania woods and a road that hadn't been paved until the 1970s. Sarah was the only grandchild. The house was hers. She arrived on a Saturday in late April, when the dogwoods were blooming and the air smelled like wet leaves and old wood. The house stood pale and angular against the trees, its white paint peeling in long strips. The porch sagged slightly on the left side. A single rocker sat motionless near the front door. Eleanor had lived here alone for 40 years, ever since Sarah's grandfather died. Sarah had visited often as a child. She remembered the first floor vividly, the kitchen with its porcelain sing, the living room stuffed with crocheted blankets and ceramic birds, the narrow hallway that smelled like lavender and dust. But she'd never been allowed upstairs. Not once. "The second floor is closed," her grandmother would say, voice flat and final. "There's nothing up there you need to see." Even as a teenager, when Sarah pressed, curious, defiant, Eleanor wouldn't budge. The upstairs was off limits. No explanation. No negotiation. Once, when Sarah was 16, she'd tried the staircase while her grandmother napped. She'd made it 3 steps before Eleanor's voice cut through the house like a blade. "Get down here! Now!" Sarah never tried again. Now, standing in the front hall with her duffel bag and a folder of estate paperwork, she looked up at the staircase. The banister was oak, dark, and smooth. 14 steps, a landing, then a hallway disappearing into shadow. She felt a strange reluctance, a whisper of her grandmother's warning echoing across the years. But Eleanor was gone. The house was Sarah's, and she had work to do. She spent the first hour cataloging the main floor. The furniture was mostly worthless. 1960s sofas, scratched side tables, lamps with frayed cords. But there were boxes everywhere. Eleanor had been a hoarder of paper, newspapers from the 1950s, church bulletins, yellowed envelopes tied with string. Sarah found receipts from 1973, a grocery list written in faded pencil, a sympathy card from someone named Judith, dated 1982. The house smelled like old fabric and stale air. She opened windows, let the spring wind push through the rooms. It helped, but only a little. The silence remained underneath, thick and waiting. By late afternoon, Sarah was ready to face the second floor. She stood at the base of the stairs, hand on the banister. The wood was cool under her palm. She climbed slowly, counting steps. Somewhere in the walls, the house settled with a low groan. At the top, the hallway stretched in both directions. 4 doors, all closed. She tried the first door on the left. Locked. The second door, also locked. The third opened easily, revealing a bathroom. Clawfoot tub, pedestal sink, a mirror clouded with age. Nothing unusual. She stepped back into the hall. The 4th door at the far end was slightly ajar. Sarah approached it carefully, the floorboards creaking under her weight. She nudged the door open with her foot. Inside was a small bedroom, barely 10 feet square. A single window faced the woods. An iron frame bed stood against the wall, stripped of linens. And in the corner, bathed in soft afternoon light, was a rocking chair. It was moving. Not violently, just a gentle back and forth, as if someone had just stood up and walked away. Sarah's breath caught. She stepped back into the hallway. No draft. The window was closed. She returned to the doorway, staring at the chair. It rocked 3 more times, slowing gradually, then stopped. Her heartbeat filled her ears. That's when she heard it. Upstairs. Directly above her head, the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the ceiling. The sound had been clear, definitive. A door closing with force, but there was no 3rd floor. The house had 2 stories and an attic, a cramped, unfinished crawl space her grandmother had used for storage. The attic entrance was a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway ceiling. Sarah could see it now, 10 feet away, the cord hanging limp and undisturbed. No one had gone up there. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Old houses made noise. Settling foundations. Thermal expansion. Wind in the eaves. She'd written an article once about alleged hauntings that turned out to be plumbing issues. She believed in explanations. But the rocking chair had been moving, and the door upstairs had slammed. Sarah walked back to the small bedroom and stood in the doorway. The rocking chair was motionless now. She scanned the room carefully. No vents, no open windows. The air was still. She stepped inside, floorboards groaning, and touched the chair. It was lightweight, made of maple, worn smooth by decades of use. She gave it a gentle push. It rocked easily, silently, too easily. It would have taken a strong draft to set it moving on its own. But there had been no draft. She left the room and stood beneath the attic entrance. The cord dangled just within reach. She hesitated, then pulled it down. The ladder unfolded with a metallic groan, releasing a shower of dust. Sarah coughed, waving the air clear. Above, the attic opening yawned dark and uninviting. She grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight, and climbed. The attic was low-ceilinged and stifling. The smell hit her first. Mothballs, rotting wood, and something faintly sweet, like old flowers left too long in a vase. She swept the flashlight across the space. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. A dressmaker's mannequin stood in the corner, headless and draped in shadow. A stack of suitcases leaned precariously near the far wall, and in the center of the attic, directly above the small bedroom, was a wooden trunk. Sarah crouched beside it. The trunk was old, maybe a century, with tarnished brass latches and leather straps cracked by age. She tried the latches. Locked. She felt along the edges, searching for a key or a weak point. Nothing. Then she noticed the floor. Scratched into the wood beside the trunk, barely visible under the dust, were letters. Deep, deliberate gouges. Sarah wiped the surface with her hand, revealing 4 words carved in shaky, uneven script. She didn't fall alone. Sarah's stomach dropped. She sat back on her heels, staring at the words. Who was she, and what did fall mean? An accident? A suicide? She thought of her grandmother's refusal to go upstairs, the locked rooms, the rocking chair, the silence that felt like waiting. Something had happened in this house. Something Eleanor had spent her entire life avoiding. Sarah took a photo of the inscription, then descended the ladder. Her mind raced. She needed context. History. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, fingers flying. Eleanor Graves, born 1924, married 1945, moved into this house with her husband in 1975 after his parents died, but the house was older than that, built in 1898. Who lived here before? Sarah spent the next hour searching online property records, genealogy databases, and county archives. The house had belonged to the Brennan family originally, Irish immigrants who farmed the land. In 1921, the property transferred to Eleanor's husband's parents, the Graves family. Eleanor moved in 54 years later, after they passed. But there was a gap in the records between 1919 and 1921. No listed owners, no tax payments. The house appeared abandoned during that period. Sarah kept digging. And then, she found it. A newspaper clipping from November 1919, the Pittsburgh Gazette, a short article buried in the back pages. Woman found deceased in county home. Circumstances under investigation. The article was brief. A woman named Margaret Brennan, age 32, had been discovered unresponsive in her family's farmhouse. Authorities suspected an accidental fall. No foul play was indicated. The article noted that Margaret had been under the care of a physician for nervous complaints and had recently returned from a period of rest at an undisclosed facility. That was all. No follow-up. No further reporting. Margaret Brennan simply vanished from the public record. Sarah stared at the screen. Margaret Brennan. The house. 1919. She thought of the inscription in the attic. She didn't fall alone. And suddenly, the locked doors upstairs felt deliberate. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her grandmother's old bed on the first floor, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. Every creak felt intentional. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. At 2 a.m, she gave up and went to the kitchen, brewing coffee in Eleanor's ancient percolator. She needed more than a newspaper clipping. She needed hospital records, asylum records, anything that could explain what had happened to Margaret Brennan, and why her grandmother had locked the second floor for 60 years. At dawn, Sarah drove into Pittsburgh. The city was waking slowly, streets empty except for delivery trucks and early commuters. She parked near the Carnegie Library and waited for it to open. Inside, she requested access to historical medical archives and county asylum records. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with bifocals and a skeptical expression, directed her to the microfiche room. Sarah spent 4 hours scrolling through records. She found Margaret Brennan's name in the admission ledger of the Allegheny County Asylum for the Insane, dated March 1919. Margaret had been committed by her husband, Thomas Brennan, under the diagnosis of melancholia with delusional features. The notes were sparse. Patient exhibits extreme distress, claims to hear voices, refuses to sleep, believes she is being watched. Margaret stayed at the asylum for 7 months. In October 1919, she was released into her husband's care. 3 weeks later, she was dead. Sarah's hands shook as she advanced the microfiche. There had to be more. She found a coroner's report. Brief, clinical, bureaucratic. Margaret Brennan had died from a fractured skull consistent with a fall down the stairs. The death was ruled accidental. No autopsy was performed. Thomas Brennan declined further investigation. But something else caught Sarah's eye. A note scrawled in the margin of the report, barely legible. Husband reports patient was alone in the house at time of incident. Door to upstairs bedroom found locked from inside. Sarah froze. Locked from the inside. She thought of the 2 doors upstairs in her grandmother's house. Still locked. Still unopened. She printed the records and drove back to the farmhouse. The afternoon light slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across the driveway. The house looked more menacing now, its windows dark and reflective. Sarah sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the second floor. Then she got out and went inside. She climbed the stairs without hesitation this time. The locked doors waited. She tried the handles again, both still firmly secured, but she was done waiting for permission. She retrieved a screwdriver from her grandmother's toolbox and wedged it into the door frame of the first locked room. The wood was old, soft with rot. After several minutes of prying, the door frame splintered and the lock gave way. The door swung open. Inside was a child's bedroom. Sarah stepped in slowly. A small bed with a faded quilt. A wooden toy chest. A shelf lined with dusty dolls. And on the wall, framed in cheap wood, was a photograph. A woman holding an infant. The woman was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pinned back and a distant, hollow expression. She wore a high-collared dress from the early 1900s. The infant in her arms was wrapped in white linen, eyes closed, face serene, too serene. Sarah looked closer. The baby's skin had an unnatural pallor. Its hands were folded across its chest in a way that didn't happen naturally, and behind the woman, barely visible in the background, was a small wooden cradle. This was a post-mortem photograph. Sarah's chest tightened. She turned and left the room, heart pounding. She crossed the hallway to the second locked door and forced it open with the screwdriver. The wood gave way more easily this time. Inside was another bedroom, larger, emptier, a single bed, a wardrobe, and on the floor beside the bed, scratched into the wood in the same shaky hand as the attic inscription, Thomas lied. Sarah knelt on the floor, tracing the words with her finger. The grooves were deep, carved with something sharp, maybe a nail, maybe a piece of broken glass. The letters were uneven, frantic. Whoever wrote this had been desperate to be heard. Thomas lied. Thomas Brennan, Margaret's husband, the man who committed her to the asylum, the man who brought her home, the man who reported her death as an accident. Sarah stood and examined the room more carefully. The wardrobe was empty except for a few wire hangers. The bed frame was iron, stripped of linens. The walls were bare, but something felt wrong. The room was too clean, too deliberate in its emptiness, as if someone had erased every trace of the person who lived here. She walked to the window and looked out. The view faced the back of the property, where the woods grew thick and dark. A rotted shed sagged near the tree line. Beyond that, nothing but wilderness. If someone screamed here, no one would hear. Sarah turned back to the room. On the far wall, near the door, she noticed something she'd missed before. A small crack in the plaster. She approached it, running her hand along the surface. The crack was vertical, maybe 3 feet long. She pressed gently. The plaster shifted. She pushed harder. A section of the wall gave way, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Sarah's breath caught. She pulled the bundle out carefully. It was surprisingly heavy. She carried it to the bed and unwrapped it slowly. Inside were 3 items: a leather-bound journal, a stack of letters tied with string, and a photograph. The same photograph from the child's bedroom, but larger, uncropped. Sarah examined the photograph first. The woman, Margaret, sat in a wooden chair, holding the infant. But in this version, the full scene was visible. Behind Margaret, standing in shadow, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a rigid posture. His hand rested on Margaret's shoulder. His expression was unreadable. Thomas Brennan. Sarah set the photograph aside and opened the journal. The handwriting inside was neat at first, then gradually deteriorated into frantic scrawls. She flipped to the first entry, dated January 1918. The baby died today. Dr. Harris says it was pneumonia. Thomas says we will try again. I cannot stop crying. I hear her at night. I know it's only my mind, but I hear her crying in the nursery. Sarah turned the page. February 1918. Thomas is angry with me. He says I must stop talking about the baby. He says it upsets him, but I cannot help it. I hear her everywhere. I hear the rocking chair moving in the nursery. I hear footsteps upstairs when Thomas is at the mill. I'm not mad. I know what I hear. March 1918. Thomas called the doctor again. Dr. Harris says I need rest. He gave me medicine that makes me sleep, but I still hear her. Last night I woke, and the nursery door was open. I know I closed it. I know I did. Thomas says I'm imagining things, but I'm not. Something is in this house with us. The entries grew more disturbed. Margaret described voices whispering her name, objects moving on their own, the rocking chair in the nursery swaying when no one was near. Thomas grew increasingly hostile, accusing her of hysteria, of embarrassing him in front of the neighbors. In March 1919, he committed her to the asylum. Sarah flipped to the final entry, dated October 28, 1919, 2 days before Margaret's death. They released me today. Thomas came to take me home. He was kind on the drive. He held my hand. He promised things would be different. But when we arrived, I saw the house, and I knew he was lying. He has always been lying. I am not mad. I never was. And I will prove it, even if no one believes me, even if I have to write it in blood on the walls. Thomas lied. He has always been lying. The journal ended there. Sarah sat motionless, the book trembling in her hands. She turned to the stack of letters. They were addressed to Margaret, postmarked 1917 through 1919. She opened one at random. It was from Margaret's sister, Catherine, living in Philadelphia. Dearest Margaret, I received your letter, and I am deeply troubled by what you describe. You must know that Thomas has written to me as well. He says you are unwell. He says you have been hearing things that are not there. But I know you, sister. I know you are not given to flights of fancy. If you say something is wrong in that house, I believe you. Please come stay with me. Leave Thomas. Leave that place. I fear for you. Another letter from a friend named Lillian. Margaret, I came to visit you yesterday, but Thomas turned me away. He says you are not receiving guests. He says you need rest. But I heard you calling from the upstairs window. I heard you, Margaret. What is happening in that house? Sarah's stomach turned. She set the letters aside and looked around the room. Margaret had been trapped here, isolated, gaslighted by her husband, dismissed by doctors, abandoned by a system that believed men over women. And when she finally came home from the asylum, something happened. Something Thomas called an accident, but Margaret didn't fall. Someone pushed her. Sarah couldn't stay in the house that night. She drove to a motel outside Pittsburgh, checked in under her own name, and sat on the bed with Margaret's journal spread in front of her. She read every entry twice, searching for proof, for something that could be verified. But it was all subjective. A woman's deteriorating mental state, documented in her own hand. In 1919, this journal would have been seen as evidence of insanity, not abuse. But Sarah believed her. She thought of her grandmother, Eleanor, moving into this house in 1975. Eleanor would have been 51, old enough to know the house's history, old enough to feel its weight. Had Eleanor known about Margaret? Had she felt the same presence Sarah felt now, the rocking chair moving, the door slamming, the silence that pressed against the walls? Eleanor had locked the second floor for 60 years. She'd known something. The next morning, Sarah returned to the house. She had a plan. If Margaret Brennan had been murdered, and Sarah was increasingly certain she had been, then there would be evidence. Not in the historical record, which Thomas Brennan had controlled, but in the house itself, in the walls, in the floors, in the places where secrets bled through. She started in the small bedroom where the rocking chair stood. She examined every inch of the room, the floorboards, the walls, the ceiling. Nothing. Then she moved to the child's nursery. She pulled back the quilt on the small bed, checked the toy chest, opened the wardrobe. Inside the wardrobe, behind a stack of folded blankets, was a small wooden box. Sarah pulled it out and opened it. Inside were more photographs. Margaret, holding the baby. Margaret standing beside Thomas in front of the house. Margaret alone, looking directly at the camera with an expression that stopped Sarah cold. It wasn't sadness. It was fear. And beneath the photographs was a wax cylinder, an old phonograph recording. Sarah's hands shook. She had no way to play it here. But she knew someone who might help, a colleague from her journalism days, an archivist at the University of Pittsburgh who specialized in early audio preservation. She called him immediately. 2 hours later, Sarah was in a university archive lab, watching as the archivist, Dr. Eugene Shaw, carefully loaded the cylinder onto a restored Edison phonograph. The machine was massive, brass and wood, with a large horn speaker. "These cylinders are fragile," Dr. Shaw warned. "If it's been stored poorly, it may not play at all, or it might disintegrate." "I understand," Sarah said. He activated the machine. The cylinder began to turn. For a long moment there was only static, a hissing, crackling void. Then, faintly, a voice emerged. A woman's voice, shaking, desperate. "My name is Margaret Brennan. It is October 30th, 1919. If you are hearing this, then I am already dead. I am recording this because no one will believe me. They think I am mad. They think I hear things that are not there. But I am not mad. I know what my husband has done. I know what he is planning to do." The recording crackled. Sarah leaned closer. "Thomas killed our baby. I know he did. She died in the night, and he said it was pneumonia, but I saw the pillow. I saw the pillow on the floor beside her crib. He killed her because she cried too much. Because she kept him awake. Because he is a man who cannot bear inconvenience." Margaret's voice broke, then steadied. "He committed me to the asylum to silence me. But I came back, and tonight, he is going to kill me. He has been drinking. He is angry. He says I have ruined his life. He says everyone in town thinks he is married to a lunatic. He told me to go upstairs. He told me to stay in the bedroom. But I know what he means to do. So I am recording this. I am leaving this evidence, and I am locking the door. I am locking myself in this room, and I will not come out. He will have to break the door down to reach me. And when he does, you will know the truth." The recording hissed. Then Margaret's voice returned, barely a whisper. "If you hear me, please, please, tell someone. Tell Catherine. Tell anyone. Do not let him say it was an accident. Do not let him walk free. I am not mad. I was never mad. I am only a woman who saw the truth, and no one would listen." The recording ended. Dr. Shaw turned off the machine. The lab was silent. Sarah sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Sarah left the university and drove straight to the county clerk's office. She requested copies of every document related to Margaret Brennan's death: the coroner's report, the police incident report, Thomas Brennan's statement. She paid for expedited copies and waited. When the clerk returned, Sarah spread the documents across the table. She read through Thomas's statement first. He claimed he'd been in town when Margaret fell. He said he returned home to find her at the bottom of the stairs, unresponsive. The door to the upstairs bedroom had been locked from the inside. He'd forced it open and found the room empty. But the coroner's report included something Thomas's statement didn't mention: bruising on Margaret's arms. Defensive bruising, the kind left by someone gripping tightly. And the police incident report noted that a neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, had reported hearing a disturbance at the Brennan house the night of Margaret's death. Raised voices. A woman screaming. But when the officer arrived, Thomas said everything was fine. His wife was asleep. The officer left. Margaret died 8 hours later. Sarah photographed every document. Then she called the Pittsburgh Police Department's cold case unit. She explained what she'd found: the journal, the letters, the recording. She submitted everything as evidence. The detective she spoke to was skeptical. It was a 100-year-old case, the perpetrator long dead, but he agreed to file a report. Margaret Brennan's death would be officially reclassified as suspicious. It wasn't justice, but it was acknowledgement. Sarah returned to the farmhouse one last time. She stood in the small bedroom where the rocking chair waited. She set the photograph of Margaret on the windowsill, propped against the glass, so the light caught her face. "I heard you," Sarah said aloud. "I listened." The house was quiet. Not the heavy, pressing silence from before. This quiet felt lighter, released. Sarah descended the stairs and walked through the first floor one last time. She decided to sell the house. She couldn't live here. But she would make sure the new owners knew its history. Margaret's story would be part of the property record now. A plaque, a memorial, something. As she reached the front door, she heard it. Faint, distant, from somewhere upstairs, the sound of a rocking chair, creaking gently, then stopping. Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. She stepped outside, closed the door behind her, and drove away. Margaret Brennan's recording is now preserved at the University of Pittsburgh Archives. Her journal has been donated to the Pennsylvania Women's History Project. Thomas Brennan was never charged with any crime. He died in 1947, his reputation intact. But Margaret's voice endures. Sometimes the past doesn't haunt us because it's restless. It haunts us because it was never heard. And the only way to silence a ghost is to finally listen. If you've ever inherited something that carried more weight than you expected, a family story, a hidden truth, or just a house that felt wrong, you're not alone. Leave your thoughts below. And if this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There are more waiting to be told. More